Chapter 6. Brief Inquiry into the Present State of Christianity in this Country. It may not be altogether improper to remind the reader that hitherto our discussion has been merely concerning the prevailing religious opinions of professed Christians. No longer confining ourselves to persons of this description, let us now extend our inquiry and briefly investigate the general state of Christianity in this country. If the foregoing representations of the state of Christianity among the bulk of professed Christians be not very erroneous, they may well excite serious apprehensions in the mind of every reader, considered merely in a political view. And these apprehensions will be increased if there should appear reason to believe that, for some time past, religion has been in decline amongst us, and that it continues to decline at the present moment. It is a truth which will hardly be contested that Christianity, whenever it has at all prevailed, has raised the general standard of morals to a height before unknown. Some actions, which among the ancients were scarcely held to be blemishes in the most excellent characters, have been justly considered by the laws of every Christian community as meriting the severest punishments. In other instances, virtues formerly rare have become common, and in particular a merciful and courteous temper has softened the rugged manners and humanized the brutal ferocity prevalent among the most polished nations of the heathen world. But from what has been recently observed, it is manifest that, so far as external appearances are concerned, these effects, when once produced by Christianity, are produced alike in those who deny and in those who admit her divine original. I had almost said it in those who reject and those who cordially embrace the doctrines of the gospel. And these effects might, and probably would, remain for a while without any great apparent alteration, however her spirit might languish, or even her authority decline. When we are inquiring, therefore, into the real state of Christianity at any period, if we be not deceived in this important investigation, it becomes us to be so much more the careful not to take up with superficial appearances. It may perhaps help us to ascertain the advancing or declining state of Christianity in Great Britain at the present moment, and still more to discover some of the causes by which that state has been produced, to employ a little time in considering what might naturally be expected to be its actual situation, what advantages or disadvantages such a religion might be expected to derive from the circumstances in which it has been placed among us, and from those in which it still continues. Experience warrants and reason justifies and explains the assertion that persecution generally tends to quicken the vigour and extend the prevalence of the opinions which she would eradicate. For the peace of mankind, it has grown at length almost into an axiom that her devilish engine back recalls upon herself. Christianity especially has always thriven under persecution. At such a season she has no lukewarm professors, no adherents concerning whom it is doubtful to what party they belong. The Christian is then reminded at every turn that his Master's kingdom is not of this world. When all on earth wears a black and threatening aspect, he looks up to heaven for consolation. He learns practically to consider himself a pilgrim and a stranger. Then he cleaves to fundamentals, and examines well his foundation, as at the hour of death. When religion is in a state of external quiet and prosperity, the contrary of all this naturally takes place. The soldiers of the church militant then forget that they are in a state of warfare. Their ardour slackens, their zeal languishes. Like a colony long settled in a strange country, they are gradually assimilated in features and demeanour and language to the native inhabitants, till at length almost every vestige of peculiarity dies away. If in general persecution and prosperity be productive respectively of these opposite effects, this circumstance alone might teach us what expectations to form concerning the state of Christianity in this country, where she has long been embodied in an establishment which is intimately blended and is generally and justly believed to have a common interest with our civil institutions, which is liberally, though by no means too liberally, endowed, and not more favoured in wealth and dignity, has been allowed to exalt her mitred front in courts and parliament, an establishment, the offices in which are extremely numerous, and these, not like the priesthood of the Jews, filled up from a particular race, or like that of the Hindus, held by a separate caste entitled to succession, but supplied from every class, and branching by its widely extended ramifications into almost every individual family in the community, An establishment, of which the ministers are not, like the Roman Catholic clergy, debarred from forming matrimonial ties, but are allowed to unite themselves and multiply their holdings to the general mass of the community by the close bonds of family connections, not like some of the severer of the religious orders, immured in colleges and monasteries, but by both law and custom permitted to mix without restraint in all the intercourses of society. Such being the circumstances of the pastors of the church, let the community in general be supposed to have been for some time in a rapidly improving state of commercial prosperity. Let it also be supposed to have been making no unequal progress in all those arts and sciences and literary productions which have ever been the growth of a polished age, and are the sure marks of a highly finished condition of society. It is not difficult to anticipate the effects likely to be produced on vital religion, both in the clergy and the laity, by such a state of external prosperity as has been assigned to them respectively. And these effects would infallibly be furthered were the country in question should enjoy a free constitution of government. We formerly had occasion to quote the remark of an accurate observer of the stage of human life, that a much looser system of morals commonly prevails among the higher than the middling and lower orders of society. Now, in every country of which the middling classes are daily growing in wealth and consequence by the success of their commercial speculations, and most of all in a country having such a constitution as our own, where the acquisition of riches is the possession also of rank and power, with the comforts and refinements, the vices also of the higher orders are continually descending, and a mischievous uniformity of sentiments and manners and morals gradually diffuses itself throughout the whole community. The multiplication of great cities also, and above all the habit, ever increasing with the increasing wealth of the country, of frequenting a splendid and luxurious metropolis, would powerfully tend to accelerate the discontinuance of the religious habits of a purer age, and to accomplish the substitution of a more relaxed morality. In times like these, therefore, the strict precepts and self-denying habits of Christianity naturally slide into disuse, and, even among the better sort of Christians, are likely to be so far softened as to become less averse to the general disposition of relaxation and indulgence. In such prosperous circumstances, men, in truth, are apt to think very little about religion. Christianity, therefore, seldom occupying the attention of the bulk of nominal Christians, and being scarcely at all the object of their study, we should expect, of course, to find them extremely unacquainted with its tenets. Those doctrines and principles, indeed, which it contains in common with the law of the land, or which are sanctioned by the general standard of morals formerly described, being brought into continual notice and mentioned by the common occurrences of life, might continue to be recognized. But whatever she contains peculiar to herself, and which should not be habitually brought into recollection by the incidents of every day, might be expected to be less and less thought of, till at length it should be almost wholly forgotten. Still more might this be naturally expected to become the case if the peculiarities in question should be, from their very nature, at war with pride and luxury and worldly mindedness, the two general concomitants of a rapidly increasing wealth, and this would particularly happen among the laity, if the circumstance of their having been at any time abused to the purposes of hypocrisy or fanaticism should have prompted some of the better disposed of the clergy, perhaps from well-intentioned though erroneous motives, to bring them forward less frequently in their discourses on religion. Still, however, a divine original of Christianity would not be professedly disavowed, partly from a real and more commonly from a political deference for the established faith, but most of all from the bulk of mankind being not yet prepared, as it were, to throw away the scabbard, and to venture their eternal happiness on the issue of its falsehood. Some bolder spirits might indeed be expected to despise the cautious moderation of these timid reasoners, and to pronounce decisively that the Bible was a forgery, while the generality, professing to believe it genuine, should, less consistently, be satisfied with remaining ignorant of its contents, and, when pressed, should discover themselves by no means to believe several of the most important particulars contained in it. When, by the operation of causes like these, any country has at length grown into the condition which has been here stated, it is but too obvious that in the bulk of the community a religion, already sunk very low, must be hastening fast to her entire dissolution. Causes energetic and active like these, though accidental hindrances may occasionally thwart their operation, will not ever become sluggish and unproductive. Their effect is sure, and the time is fast approaching when Christianity will be almost as openly disavowed in the language as in fact it is already supposed to have disappeared from the conduct of men, when infidelity will be held to be the necessary appendage of the man of fashion, and to believe will be deemed the indication of a feeble mind and a contracted understanding. Something like what have been here premised are the conjectures which we should all naturally be led to form concerning the state of Christianity in this country and its probable issue, from considering her own nature and the peculiar circumstances in which she has been placed. That her real condition differs not much from the result of this reasoning from probability must, with whatever regret, be confessed by all who take a careful and impartial survey of the actual situation of things among us. Everywhere we may actually trace the effects of increasing wealth and luxury, in banishing one by one the habits, and new modelling the phraseology of stricter times, and in diffusing throughout the middle ranks those relaxed morals and dissipated manners which were formerly confined to the higher classes of society. We meet indeed with more refinement, and with more of those amiable courtesies which are its proper fruits. Those vices also have become less frequent, which naturally infest the darkness of a ruder and less polished age, and which recede on the approach of light and civilization. But, on the other hand, with these grossnesses, religion also has declined. God is forgotten. His providence is exploded. His hand is lifted up, but we see it not. He multiplies our comforts, but we are not grateful. He visits us with chastisements, but we are not contrite. The portion of the week set apart to the service of religion we give up without reluctance to vanity and dissipation. But when there is not this open and shameless disavowal of religion, few traces of it are to be found. Improving in almost every other branch of knowledge, we have become less and less acquainted with Christianity. The preceding chapters have pointed out, among those who believe themselves to be orthodox Christians, a deplorable ignorance of the religion they profess, an utter forgetfulness of the peculiar doctrines by which it is characterized, a disposition to regard it as a mere system of ethics, and, what might seem an inconsistency, at the same time a most inadequate idea of the nature and strictness of its practical principles. This declension of Christianity into a mere system of ethics may partly be accounted for, as has been lately suggested, by considering the corruption of our nature, what Christianity is, and in what circumstances she has been placed in this country. But it has also been considerably promoted by one peculiar cause, on which, for many reasons, it may not be improper to dwell a little more particularly. Christianity in its best days, for the credit of our representations, let this be remembered by those who object to our statement as austere and contracted, was such as it has been delineated in the present work. This was the religion of the most eminent reformers, of those bright ornaments in our country who suffered martyrdom under Queen Mary, of their successors in the times of Elizabeth, in short, of all the pillars of our Protestant Church, of many of its highest dignitaries, of Davenant, of Jewell, of Hall, of Reynolds, of Beveridge, of Hooker, of Andrews, of Smith, of Leighton, of Usher, of Hopkins, of Baxter, and of many others of scarcely inferior note. In their pages the peculiar doctrines of Christianity were everywhere visible, and on the deep and solid basis of these doctrinal truths were laid the foundations of a superstructure of morals proportionately broad and exalted. Of this fact their writings still extant are a decisive proof, and they who may want leisure or opportunity or inclination for the perusal of these valuable records may satisfy themselves of the truth of the assertion that, such as we have stated it, was the Christianity of those times, by consulting our articles and homilies, or even by carefully examining our excellent liturgy. But from that tendency to deterioration lately noticed, these great fundamental truths began to be somewhat less prominent in the compositions of many of the leading divines before the time of the civil wars. During that period, however, the peculiar doctrines of Christianity were grievously abused by many of the sectaries who were foremost in the commotions of those unhappy days, who, while they talked copiously of the free grace of Christ and the operations of the Holy Spirit, were by their lives an open scandal to the name of Christian. Towards the close of the last century, the divines of the established church, whether it arose from the obscurity of their own views or from a strong impression of former abuses, and of the evils which had resulted from them, began to run into a different error. They professed to make it their chief object to inculcate the moral and practical precepts of Christianity, which they conceived to have been before too much neglected, but without sufficiently maintaining, often even without justly laying, the grand foundation of a sinner's acceptance with God, or pointing out how the practical precepts of Christianity grow out of her peculiar doctrines and are inseparably connected with them. By this fatal error, the very genius and essential nature of Christianity imperceptibly underwent a change. She no longer retained her peculiar characters or produced that appropriate frame of spirit by which her followers had been characterized. The example thus set was followed during the present century, and its effect was aided by various causes already pointed out. In addition to these, it may be proper to mention as a cause of powerful operation that for the last 50 years the press has teemed with moral essays, many of them published periodically and most extensively circulated, which, being considered either as works of mere entertainment, or in which at least entertainment was to be blended with instruction, rather than as religious pieces, were kept free from whatever might give them the air of sermons, or cause them to wear an appearance of seriousness inconsistent with the idea of relaxation. But in this way the fatal habit of considering Christian morals as distinct from Christian doctrines insensibly gained strength. Thus the peculiar doctrines of Christianity went more and more out of sight, and, as might naturally have been expected, the moral system itself, being robbed of what should have supplied it with life and nutriment, began to wither and decay. At length, in our own days, these peculiar doctrines have almost altogether vanished from view. Even in the greater number of our sermons, scarcely any traces of them are to be found. Can there then be a doubt whither the path in which we are travelling, and whither at length it must conduct us? If any should hesitate, let them take a lesson from experience. In a neighbouring country, several of the same causes have been in action, and they have at length produced their full effect. Manners corrupted, morals depraved, dissipation predominant. Above all, religion discredited, and infidelity grown into repute and fashion, terminated in the public disavowal of every religious principle which had been used to attract the veneration of mankind. The representatives of a whole nation publicly witnessing, not only without horror, but, to say the least, without disapprobation, an open, unqualified denial of the very existence of God, and at length, as a body, withdrawing their allegiance from the majesty of heaven. There are not a few, perhaps, who may have witnessed with apprehension, and may be ready to confess with pain, the gradual declension of religion, but who at the same time may conceive that the writer of this tract is disposed to carry things too far. They may even allege that the degree of religion for which he contends is inconsistent with the ordinary business of life and with the well-being of society, that, if it were generally to prevail, people would be wholly engrossed by religion, and all their time occupied by prayer and preaching. Men not being sufficiently interested in the pursuit of temporal objects, agriculture and commerce would decline, the arts would languish, the very duties of common life would be neglected, and in short, the whole machine of civil society would be obstructed and speedily stopped. In reply to this objection, it may be urged that, though we should allow it for a moment to be in a considerable degree well-founded, yet this admission should not warrant the conclusion intended to be drawn from it. The question would still remain whether our representation of what Christianity requires be agreeable to the Word of God. For if it be, surely it must be confessed to be a matter of small account to sacrifice a little worldly comfort and prosperity during the short span of our existence in this life, in order to secure a crown of eternal glory and the enjoyment of those pleasures which are at God's right hand for evermore. It might be added also that our blessed Saviour had plainly declared that it would often be required of Christians to make such a sacrifice, and had forewarned us that, in order to be able to do it with cheerfulness whenever the occasion should arrive, we must habitually sit loose to all worldly possessions and enjoyments. And it might be further remarked that, though it were even admitted that the general prevalence of vital Christianity should somewhat interfere with the views of national wealth and aggrandizement, yet there is too much reason to believe that, do all we can, this general prevalence needs not be apprehended, or, to speak more justly, could not be hoped for. But indeed the objection on which we have now been commenting is not only groundless, but directly contrary to truth. If Christianity, such as we have represented it, were generally to prevail, the world, from being such as it is, would become a scene of general peace and prosperity, and, abating the chances and calamities which flesh is inseparably heir to, would wear one unwearied face of complacency and joy. Let it be remembered that the grand characteristic mark of the true Christian, which has been insisted on, is his desiring to please God in all his thoughts and words and actions, to take the revealed word to be the rule of his belief and practice, to let his light shine before men, and in all things to adorn the doctrine which he professes. No calling is prescribed, no pursuit is forbidden, no science or art, no pleasure is disallowed, which is reconcilable with this principle. It must indeed be confessed that Christianity would not favour that vehement and inordinate ardour in the pursuit of temporal objects which tends to the acquisition of immense wealth or of widely spread renown, nor is it calculated to gratify the extravagant views of those mistaken politicians, the chief object of whose admiration and the main scope of whose endeavours for their country are extended dominion and commanding power and unrivalled affluence, rather than those more solid advantages of peace and comfort and security. These men would barter comfort for greatness. In their vain reveries they forget that a nation consists of individuals, and that true national prosperity is no other than the multiplication of particular happiness. But, in fact, so far is it from being true that the prevalence of real religion would produce a stagnation in life, that a man, whatever might be his employment or pursuit, will be furnished with a new motive to prosecute it with alacrity, a motive far more constant and vigorous than any human prospects can supply. At the same time, his solicitude not being so much to succeed in whatever he might be engaged in, as to act from a pure principle and leave the event to God. He would not be liable to the same disappointments as men who are active and laborious from a desire of worldly gain or of human estimation. Thus he would possess the true secret of a life at the same time useful and happy. Following peace also with all men, and looking upon them as members of the same family, entitled not only to the debts of justice, but to the less definite and more liberal claims of fraternal kindness, he would naturally be respected and beloved by others, and be in himself free from the annoyance of those bad passions by which they who are actuated by worldly principles are so commonly corroded. If any country were indeed filled with men, each thus diligently discharging the duties of his own station, without breaking in upon the rights of others, but on the contrary endeavouring, so far as he might be able, to forward their views and promote their happiness, all would be active and harmonious in the goodly frame of human society. There would be no jarrings, no discord. The whole machine of civil life would work without obstruction or disorder, and the course of its movements would be like the harmony of the spheres. Such would be the happy state of a truly Christian nation within itself. Nor would its condition with regard to foreign countries form a contrast to this its internal comfort. Such a community, on the contrary, peaceful at home, would be respected and beloved abroad. General integrity in all its dealings would inspire universal confidence. Differences between nations commonly arise from mutual injuries, and still more from natural jealousy and distrust. Of the former there would be no longer any ground for complaint. The latter would find nothing to attach upon. But if in spite of all its justice and forbearance the violence of some neighbouring state should force it to resist an unprovoked attack, for hostilities strictly defensive are those only in which it would be engaged, its domestic union would double its national force, while the consciousness of a good cause and of the general favour of heaven would invigorate its arm and inspirit its efforts. But it may be enough to have briefly hinted at the course of conduct which, in the present circumstances of this country, motives merely political should prompt us to pursue. To all who have at heart the national welfare, the above suggestions are solemnly submitted. They have not been urged altogether without misgivings, lest it should appear as though the concerns of eternity were melted down into a mere matter of temporal advantage or political expediency. But since it has graciously pleased the Supreme Being to so arrange the constitution of things as to render the prevalence of true religion and of pure morality conducive to the well-being of states and the preservation of civil order, and since these subordinate inducements are not unfrequently held forth even by the sacred writers, it seemed not improper, and scarcely liable to misconstruction, to suggest inferior motives to readers who might be less disposed to listen to considerations of a higher order.